Hello, and welcome to another presentation. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about notice of liability, but I want you to slow down and think how this could apply to other cases, say from your local government, when they try to tell you you're obligated to do something. If you remember from my last NOL presentation, I said people shouldn't use NOLs because you're notifying the other side of a potential problem. But one of the things that comes up quite often is people write up an NOL and they tell the party that if they don't do something, then they're obligating themselves under certain terms and conditions. So I brought out a Supreme Court case ruling, National Trust Co. versus Meade, 1990. SCR stands for Supreme Court Case. It's on page 410, and it's about 30 pages in length. And it says, the common law has long recognized that while one may be free to assign a contractual benefit to a third party, the same cannot be said for a contractual obligation. That means if you want to set up some sort of a benefit for somebody, that's fine, because it's not going to be anything, that's detrimental, and they can refuse it or accept it. But you can't set up a contractual obligation, meaning you can't obligate them to do something without their consent. That's what that comes down to. The principle results from the fusion of two fundamental principles under contract law. Principle one is that the parties are able to make bargains with parties of their own choice, meaning you have a right to a freedom of contract. And number two, the parties do not have to discharge any contractual obligations they had no part in creating, which is still under this privity of contract. So if some party is trying to say you owe them this or you have to pay this, and it's some contract that you had nothing to do with, then the second argument here would follow through to support your claim that the parties don't have to discharge this contractual obligation because in actual fact there is no contract. Okay, I hope that's clear. They had no part in making this contractual agreement, and yet they're somehow bound to it? No. That violates the privity of contract rule. So when a municipality or a utility company or your local council or your city hall tells you that you have to do something, simply refuse it and say, I wasn't party to the contract. Now, if you listen to my previous video that talks about Canada, you'll see in that video I specifically show that the federal government really doesn't have anything to do with income tax, yet when we pay income tax, it's collected by the federal government. But every province is actually independent in and of itself. That's why Quebec has its own civil rules. That's also why it has its own embassies and stuff like that, because Quebec realizes, as the rest of the provinces should, that they're not really part of Canada. Canada is a corporation, and each province is an individual corporation. So every province in Canada is actually independent and sovereign in and of itself. Your municipalities try the same thing. Now, if we take a look at the structure of government, which I could put into another presentation, but it's not hardly worth it, the federal government gives its jurisdiction to the provincial government, which it has no right to do because the provinces are independent anyway, and the provincial government hands down its jurisdiction to the local municipalities. So if you really looked at it based on what I told you in the Canada presentation uploaded a few days ago, you'll realize that the federal government has no jurisdiction. And it also tells you in there why they will disregard the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Because when we deal with the court, normally, we are dealing with the provincial court, Ontario Superior Court, right? We're not dealing with the federal government. And since the federal government is actually independent and has no jurisdiction based on what I've explained, that's why people don't get a proper trial in court. Anyway, so for those of you who are writing NOLs and telling a party that they're subject to a $1 million penalty or some other, you're going to give them this notice of liability or a claim of right, and you're imposing all these ridiculous fees, read section 2 of the stream. Okay? Under number 2, the parties do not have to discharge any contractual obligation they had no part in creating. In other words, you can't force somebody into a contract. Now, if you can't do it, neither can they, meaning the government. Because we're all supposed to be equal under the law. No one is above the law. So if the courts can disregard things, so can you. If you can't obligate the government to do something, and yet they're supposed to be your representative, then they can't obligate you to do something either. If you have any other topics, or you would like to contact me, please send me an email and a topic that you would like added to this a growing list of presentations I'm making, and send it to the email address on the screen. I do not share your email with anyone. If somebody wants to contact you, and I happen to have your email, I'll contact you and give you their contact information, and then it's up to you two to connect. If you just decide not to, well, good, or not good, doesn't matter to me. I just provide the information to you. ABC person wants to get a hold of you, here's their address, and what you choose to do with it's up to you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this short presentation, and I'll provide more information on the next one. Thank you. Have a great day.